In this video, we're going to talk about how you can use the template tester to design client-side templates and also to learn the syntax of the client-side template engine. So to get to the template tester, you go to Tools menu and then open up the JSON Data Template Tester, which opens up over here as a modeless dialog. So that means that you can leave it up or put it on a second screen if you have a two-monitor setup. And the dialog itself is divided into three sections. A data section where you can type in JSON data, a template section where you can type in template, and then the results section where you can see the result of the data being merged into the template. There's also a JavaScript function where you can define any JavaScript functions that are needed in your template. So we can start out here and we can create some very simple data. So let's just go here and type in, say, name Fred. So now we have some data, and now let's go and define our template. So we'll type hello, and you can see that as we start typing over here, the template result is being shown. And now we'll go here and we'll type in our placeholder, and as soon as we type in the valid placeholder, you can see there it says Fred. So now let's go and make our little JSON data over here a little bit richer. So we'll go here and we'll type in city, and then we'll type in, say, Boston. And you can see that basically passes the JSON in real time. So this is telling me now that my JSON data is not valid. So I'll just go there and make it valid. And now we can go here and type in who lives in, and then we'll type in, say, city over there. Now notice that the template itself is case sensitive. So if I go and type in city like that, it basically fails because city is defined with lowercase data over there. So the template tester is great for typing in JSON data and also templates, and then testing in real time how those templates will be evaluated. But there's a lot more to the template tester that is useful. In particular, there are tons of built-in examples that you can explore, and that'll help you learn the template syntax. So let's go now and start to explore some of these built-in examples. So I'm going to go there, and first I'll just open up the first example, which is a simple object and a simple template. So this is pretty much what we've seen before. So there's our first name, last name, and there's the template over there. Now let's bring up the next example, which is again now a slightly more complex JSON data object. So you can see now we've got first name and last name, and then address is actually a nested object. So address is an object that has street, city, and state properties, and in order to emit the street, city, and state in our template, we're using address.street, address.city, and address.state. So you can see there's the template result being emitted over there. Now, having to fully qualify the placeholders in the template when you have sub-objects or sub-arrays is tiresome. So you can see this in this next example. We show how you can use a scope construct. So here's the same JSON data. We've got address over here, but if we look at our template now, we have a scope variable. So address here represents not a particular piece of data, but a scope. So this is the address scope, and then so there's the start of the address scope, and there's the end of the address scope, and then within the address scope we can just refer to street, city, and state without fully qualifying those placeholders. So we get the same output that we got from the previous example, but it's much easier to work with because we're using these scope variables or scope placeholders, and then within the scope we can just use street, city, and state. So let's pause now and then explore the rest of the examples in the template tester. So we're continuing now looking at the template tester and examining the various examples that come with the template tester. So we'll go back now and load the next example. So we can see that this example talks about how you can use expressions in your template. So in this case our data is very simple. We just have three properties: product, quantity, and price. But if we look at our template, you can see that we've got JavaScript expressions inside the placeholders. So for the product placeholder, we're calling the to uppercase JavaScript method. So you can see there that book is displayed in uppercase. Then we have price and quantity. There's price and there's quantity. And then we've got total, where we've actually entered an expression. We've entered price times quantity. And then we've also used the number format directive to display the number with 2 decimal places and a leading $sign. So when you're building the template over here, and you can see that we've got our format over there, you can actually just use insert format directive, insert a numeric format, and for example they click OK now, and we've just inserted a different numeric format over there. So we've actually also made an error. Oh, there we've got a double colon there, so let's go fix that up, and that should fix it up. Let's go and see what we've still done wrong over here. So there we go, we were missing our trailing curly brace. So the ability to include arbitrary expressions, arbitrary JavaScript expressions, and use formatting directives in the template is a powerful feature of the template. So let's go back now and look at the next example. So there we've used an expression. Now let's look at using JavaScript functions for computed values. So let's load this template over here. And you can see that in this particular case the template has, the data has first name and last name. But if we look at our template, we can see here the template says hello, and then it uses this @ sign, full name, and this indicates that we want to actually call a function, a JavaScript function called full name, and emit the result of the function. So you can see that what we see here is hello Fred Smith. So now let's go look at this function definition for full name. So we can click on JavaScript functions there, and we see that the function full name returns data.firstname and data.lastname, concatenates those two values. So the JavaScript function itself gets called with data, which is the data in the data array that is passed into the function. So the ability to use functions in your template allows you to create very complex computed values from the input data in the data that is passed into the template expander. Let's go now on to the next example. So using number and date formatting in the template. So we've already discussed how we can use number formatting, but we can also use date formatting. So if we look here at our template, we can see that the template has a salary value that's a numeric, and also a date value, which is a JavaScript date object. And then you can see in our template we've used the number directive to format the salary number with a leading $sign, a comma for the thousand separator, and 2 decimal places. So you can see there's the formatted number over there. And then for the date value, we've used the date directive, and then here's our syntax there for the date value. So this date syntax, the date formatting directive, can be inserted by just using the insert format directive and then choosing the date format. So, and then finally for the phone number here, we've used a string template. So here's our string template. Basically the equal sign indicates that it's a template, and then there's the actual template. Now this can also be just inserted by just going straight over to the insert format directive, choosing numeric format, and there for example was the string format. So just go and click OK, and it'll insert it directly for us into the template. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now looking at the various examples built into the template tester. So let's move on to the next example here, which is alternative text for missing values. So you can see here that we have a very simple data object that's got first name and last name, but in our template we're emitting first name, last name, and then another field called title, which doesn't actually exist in our data template, and we've specified alternative text to display for missing values. So using the double pipe syntax, we specified that if a value for title is not found, then we want to omit the words not available. So you can see that if we were to remove that directive, then the title will just appear as blank because there's missing data gets replaced with a blank value. But by putting in this directive, say not available, we can specify text that will appear in the expanded template for missing data. Now if we were to go here and actually type in a valid title, so let's go here and type in title manager, you can see now that the manager gets filled in automatically. So now moving on to the next example, we've discussed missing data. Now let's talk about data that contains arrays. So we'll go ahead there, and now you can see that what we have over here is an array, and inside the array we have two objects. The first object has first name of Fred and Smith, and the second object has Laura and Lineker. And then if we look at our template, we can see that there's first name and last name, and the template gets expanded for each instance, for each array instance in the passed in data. So the output basically has employee name Fred Smith and then employee name Laura Lineker. So in this case you can see we've passed in an array of objects, but the preferred method for passing in data is using objects, not arrays. So if we go look here at the second example over here, you can see that our output looks very similar, but the data that is passed in now is not an array, but it's an object that has an array as a nested array within the object. So we can see now that we have employees as a property, and that employees has a subarray. So the syntax in our template now is a little bit different. We're going to use a scope variable of employees to indicate that we want to loop over the employees array emitting this data. So this is very similar to the technique that we discussed, I think, in the first example, the second example. So here we have the same data being emitted. Now the advantage of using a nested array, as we've done over here, is that we can then use headers and footers and also compute summary values, as we'll show in subsequent examples. So let's go back now and talk about headers and footers. So you can see now we basically have the same data, but now within our scope variable, within the employee scope, we've got this header construct and also the footer construct. So if we look at our output, here's the header and there's the footer that surrounds all of the data in the array. So the ability to include headers and footers in your templates is very powerful. But in order to do that, you do need to have your data in the form of an object and a nested array within an object. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing with our tour of the various examples that are built into the template tester, and what we've just shown is how you can add headers and footers to your template. Now the next example shows how you can include summary values in the headers and footers. So for example, we might want to include, say, a summary value that shows perhaps how many employees were in the array. So let's go back to load examples now, and we'll load our next example, and you can see here what we've done is in our footer now we've basically added in a count of the number of employees inside the array. So this is showing that there were 2 employees in the array, and in order to compute this count value, we've called a JavaScript function called count employees. So let's go take a look now at this JavaScript function. So we can see here that the JavaScript function is returning data scope.length. So we'll explain the concept of scope in a later example, but simply put over here, data scope is the array of items inside the employee scope. So in this particular case, data is the array, Scope is the name of the scope being passed in, and we're just simply returning the length of the array. So that's the JavaScript that gives you the length of an array. So let's move on now to the next example, where we'll talk about nested arrays. So if we look over here, we can see that our data now has an array of employees, and for each employee we have a property called skills, which references a nested array of skills that that particular employee might have. So this first employee, Fred Smith, has JavaScript and CSS skills. The second employee, Laura Lineker, has XBasic skills. So if we look at our template now, we can see that within the employees scope we start a new scope here called skills, and then inside the skills scope, in order to emit the actual value of the skill, we use the special placeholder curly bracket and then square bracket value. And the reason that we're using square bracket value is that this subarray here is a subarray of values, not a subarray of objects. So in the next example we'll show how this would be modified if skills was actually not an array of values but an array of objects. But you can see here we also still have the count in the footer showing how many employees we have. So let's go on now to the next example, where we talk about nested arrays of objects. So this looks very similar to the previous example, excepting that in this case the skills nested array is not an array of values but an array of objects. So basically each item in the array is an object with a property called name, and then of course it could have other properties as well. So now, since we have an array, a nested array of objects, instead of using that square bracket value syntax, we can just simply use name, which is the placeholder for this property over there. So the output is very similar to the previous example, but the syntax to reference a value in this nested array is slightly different, because in this case, as we mentioned, this is a nested array of objects, not a nested array of values. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing with our tour of the template tester, and next we're going to take a look at summary values at each level in a nested array. So we've previously shown how we can compute the count of the number of employees over here. So this summary value is for the outer scope, for the employee scope over here. But what if we also wanted to display a count of the number of skills that each employee has? So let's go now and load this example, and you can see now that what we have is that for each employee we have a count of the number of skills that that particular employee has. So if we look at our template here, we can see there's the skills scope variable nested within the employees scope placeholder, and then within skills we've defined a footer, and we've emit this text here in using the italics tag, and then we call a JavaScript function called count skills. And if we go and look at our JavaScript function over here, we can see that count skills just returns data.scope.length. So in actual fact it's defined exactly the same way as count employees, but of course the difference is that the data that is passed into this function is different than the data that is passed into this function. Count employees gets the array of all of the employees, whereas count skills gets the array of all the skills for the particular employee. So the ability to compute summary data exists at any level of nested subarrays. So let's go back now and continue with our examples. And now let's take a look at how you can show alternate text if there's no data in a particular array. So let's go now, and you can see now we've added a new employee to our array of employees, but the skills for this employee, for this last employee, are empty. There's no data in this array. So you can see that what we output over here is no skills yet, and that's defined by putting this star empty placeholder into the scope object here. So within skills, we've specified this text to display if there are no rows in the skills array. On the other hand, if there are rows in the skills array, we're going to emit the standard placeholders, the skill name followed by the actual value of the skill name, and then in the footer the count of the number of skills. So going back to another example, let's now basically look at how you can put counters into the arrays. So we'll go back here, and you can see now that we have counters. There's the first employee, there's the second employee, there's the third employee, and then on the skills we have the first skill and the second skill. So if we look here at the employee name, you can see that we have the employee name over there in bold, but then in front of that we have a special placeholder here called count1 based. So if we go here and insert commands, you can see there's various commands are listed here. So count1 based is obviously a 1 based count, and just count is a 0 based count. So a 0 based count means that the first row has a value of 0, etc. So putting in counters for each array instance is very easy using the special count1 based directive. So going back to the examples over here, let's now take a look at using the square bracket operator in a scope placeholder. So let's open this one up here, and what we can see over here is a template that displays a heading here that shows what data will be displayed in the template. So you can see here we say showing employees from Smith to programmer. Smith, of course, is the first array instance, and programmer here is the last array instance. So if we go back here and look at our template, we can see that outside of the scope we're using employee and then 0.lastname, so that's the last name from the first row. And let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now our tour of the template tester, and we've just discussed how outside of the scope variable, outside of the employee scope variable, employee 0.lastname is going to be a reference to the first array instance, so that's going to be the reference to Smith, and then employees -1.lastname is a reference to the last array instance, which in this case would be programmer. So using the special square bracket syntax inside the scope placeholders, you can reference values within the nested arrays. So let's go now and load the next example. So let's discuss now how you can use conditional logic in your templates. So we'll go here now, and you can see that we again have very simple data here, but we've added in a state property for each employee, and then in our template we've used the star if, star else if syntax to create a conditional section in our template. So here within the template we've got star if and then a JavaScript expression that can reference any properties inside the current row that is being emitted. So here we're saying that if the state is equal to Massachusetts, then emit this text over there. Otherwise emit that text, or finally if it's not Massachusetts or California, then emit that text over here. So you can see that that when the template is expanded, the logical expressions here are being correctly evaluated. So the ability to include logical if then else tests within the template and have different sections of the template be conditioned based on data within the current row that is being expanded is very powerful. So let's carry on here and look at an example where we have multiple arrays, and then we compute a summary value that summarizes data from each of the arrays. So you can see that we have here an object with two properties, charges and payments, and then charges is a subarray and payments has a subarray, and then what we're emitting over here in our template is a list of all the charges and then the total of the charges, then a list of all the payments, a total of all the payments, and then finally the net amount due. So if we go look at our template, we can see that we have a scope variable for charges. So this is where we loop over all of the charges and emit that data. Then we have a scope variable for payments, and where we loop over all of the payments and we emit that data. And then finally we have the net amount due, where we call the JavaScript function to compute the net amount due. So now let's go and take a look at the JavaScript functions that do the work. So you can see that first of all that the JavaScript function to compute total charges and to compute total payments is actually the same function. We're calling total due in both cases, and the reason that we can call the same function is that in this case this function is going to get passed in the data for the charges, and in this case the data passed in will be the data for payments. So let's go now and take a look at the JavaScript function. But before we do that, I'd actually like to discuss the next example, which explains the concept of data and scope as it relates to functions. And then having done that, understanding these functions here will become a little bit easier. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing now with our tour of the examples in the template tester, and we're going to load this last example here, which is understanding the data and scope arguments in JavaScript functions. So you can see that here we have a very simple data object. It's just an object with a customer property, which then has a nested array of objects. And in our template over here we have our customer scope there, and then within the customer scope we're emitting name and amount due. So you can see there's name and amount due, but we're also calling this JavaScript function we created called data. And if you look at the template, you can see that we're actually going to emit we're going to call this JavaScript function data in three different places. We're going to call it for each row in the array, then we're going to call it in the footer, and then finally we're going to call it outside of the scope variable, so we're going to call it over there. So there's three different places where we're calling this data function. The data function itself is just going to take the data that was passed into the function and convert it into a JSON string so we can see what data is passed into the object, and then we're going to emit the JSON data, and we're also going to emit the value of the scope variable that was passed in to the function. So this will help us understand what gets passed into JavaScript functions when they're called from the template. So looking now at the result here, we can see that for each row instance over here, so you can see there's the name, there's the amount due over there, and then over here we have scope. We have the data that is passed into any function that is called within the scope object. So we can see that what gets passed in over here is just the data for the current row. So this has got name and amount due. So we don't have any arrays over here, we just simply have an object that is passed in. So for the first row the data contains this object, for the second row data contains that object, and then for the third row data contains this object, and the scope value that is passed into the function is blank. Now let's take a look over here at what gets put into the footer. So the footer is over here. This output over there is the footer, and we can see in this case the scope says customer, and the data that is passed in is the entire object. It's basically customer, and then within the customer is a property which is the actual array of data. So and we can also see that this here completely matches this output over there. So what this is showing us is that if you call a JavaScript function from within a footer or header of a scope, you're going to get the same data as if you were outside the scope. In other words, the data passed into the function over here is the same as the data passed into the function over here. So for any row instance here, you don't have access to the entire array, but inside the footer you do have access to the array. So with that in mind, let's go back now to the previous example and try to understand how this net amount due function, which computes this net amount due, was constructed. So we'll go back now to our JavaScript functions, and here's our net amount due. So you can see that what's passed in over here is data and scope, but we don't really care about the scope value here that's passed in. What we care about is getting first an array of charges, which we do by saying data and then specifying the charges property. So this is going to give us an array of all the charges, and then we just loop over that array and add up the amount field. So this gives us total charges. Now we want the array of payments, so we basically call data payments. This gives us an array of all the payments. We loop over all the items to compute the total payments, and then we compute the net amount due, and then we format that with 2 decimal places. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video. So we're continuing our tour of the examples in the template tester, and we're looking now at how the net due function computed the net amount due by subtracting the total payments received from the total charges incurred. And then before we return the value, you can see here we call the toFormat method of this number object, and we format it using this format directive. So that gives us this value over here. So the last item that I'd like to discuss in the template tester is how you can access the JavaScript debugger to debug the JavaScript functions. So you can see that in many cases the JavaScript functions that you call in your template are pretty simple, but in this case here, this net due function actually got to be fairly complex, and it would be nice to be able to debug into this function as it's executing. So let's go ahead now and see how this can be done. So I'm going to go here and type in debugger to open up the debugger. Now this by itself is not sufficient to open the debugger, so you can see that as the template reevaluates, the debugger doesn't actually open up. In order to actually open up the debugger, what we have to do is click this hyperlink here to launch the Chrome debugger, which is going to launch the Chrome debugger, and unfortunately the debugger immediately goes to the background. So you have to go to the toolbar and put your mouse over the alpha icon on the toolbar, and you'll see another window over there which has the Chrome HTML debugger, the Chrome JavaScript debugger in it. And now what I can do is, if I just make any change to my template, the debugger will pause now, and now I can basically step through my JavaScript function. So you can see now we're stepping through the function, and we can put watch variables over there, and we can actually see exactly how the function is evaluating. We can go here and we can see the data object that is passed in. There's charges, which has got an array of 3 items in it. There's the payments, which has got an array with 2 items in it, etc. So the ability to debug into your JavaScript functions while you're using the template tester is extremely powerful. So let's go ahead now and just run it, and then close down the debugger, and we can see our value over there. Now as mentioned earlier, templates are used all over the list control, and the ability to get to the template tester from within the list control builder is very powerful. So let's now go over to, say, some list control that we've previously defined. Let's go over here and edit this component and then bring up the list builder. And you can see now, if we go to, for example, the list layout here, we have template over here, and this customer ID, this is actually a template. So we're able to launch the template tester right from within the builder and start testing various template syntaxes so that we can use them in the template for individual fields in a columnar layout, or if we were to switch this layout here from columnar to freeform, then again over here we can use the full template syntax that we've been exploring in this video in the templates in the list control. So thank you very much for watching.